So in my last video, I started to take a look at the Spider-Men that were released as part of the Marvel Famous Covers series line. And today I'm going to continue the theme by looking at Spidey's Rogue Gallery. Now you may also notice, those who are eagle-eyed amongst you, that there's an extra character in here who isn't technically part of the Rogues Gallery, and that is of course Aunt May. Now, Aunt May, of course, was the mail-away exclusive, and since she's part of Spider-Man's world, I thought it was appropriate to put her in at least one of the Spider-Man videos, but I wasn't quite sure which one would be the best one to put her in. So she's going to sit in here today, and we'll take a look at her a little bit later. So I'm going to start today by looking at one of the deluxe releases, one of these Target exclusive sets, which was a double pack of Spider-Man in his blue and red costume, which we saw in the last video, and Electro. I have to say, given how few Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery actually made it into this line, I think Electro is an interesting choice. Now, whilst I'm not the biggest Electro fan in the world, he certainly wouldn't be on my top 10 list, I do think he makes quite a good choice for a toy in this line, because he is obviously, his costume's very bright and colourful and quite distinctive, and it's an unusual choice, certainly, to put in your lineup. However, this was a Target exclusive release, and that may have had some influence on the decision. But regardless, the packaging, as we've come to expect from these double sets, is very, very nice. It is essentially taking the same design that we get for the single carded figures and expanding it to a widescreen format, if you will, to house both figures. And I think the presentation is fantastic. These are very, very displayable. You know by now that I'm a big fan of this packaging overall anyway, and I really like the two distinctive images we have of the characters there. Obviously we have the webs with Spider-Man, and we have the electricity sparks coming from Electro, and I think the colouring and the overall presentation is very, very nice. Now, for the famous cover, they've gone for Electro's first appearance, which was of course Amazing Spider-Man issue 9. I don't think this is one of the more dynamic covers featuring Electro across all the years. However, it is obviously his first appearance. That automatically gives it some status, and I can understand why it would be a candidate to be judged as the famous cover for this character. Meanwhile, the reverse of the packaging has some very nice images here on the background with a little bit of bio about this pair's first meeting, which is pretty cool. Obviously, this image of Spider-Man is a very famous image. It's been obviously digitized and perhaps altered in certain ways, but obviously it is a very striking image that we saw in the 90s. I think it was an Eric Larson image. I could be wrong, but nevertheless, very striking, and I think the action pose of Electro here is really fun and dynamic too. And of course, the front covers open up to reveal the figures inside in that wonderful window packaging display there, which I love very much. I think they look really, really good in that sort of mid-action pose. And of course, on either side, we have a little bit more information about the characters. And again, just very, very nicely presented. It has that deluxe feel to it, and I think this is a really nice set. So, moving on to the figure himself, the first thing to note is that he is obviously very bright and colourful, and his costume has been faithfully recreated here, I think, although the green is maybe slightly lighter, more of a lime green than the darker green that we're used to seeing in the pages of the comics. So, clearly they have given Electro a face mask, which is a sort of semi-hard plastic. It's not a rubber, but it is fairly flexible. There's a little bit of give in it, which is nice. And this is very nicely moulded. It's a nice sculpt. Now, it is on a string back, so you can peel this off and put it back on. And it looks pretty good, all in all. Underneath, we do have the Max Dillon head, which I have to say, yeah, you're probably going to want to leave the mask on. It doesn't look great. He also has a hood there that you can pull down, and there's an oddity here, quite a curiosity, is he does have a hole in the head. I'm not quite sure why or what this is for. It makes me wonder whether initially they had planned to maybe have a plug-in as part of the mask that was going to secure itself to the top of his head, but decided against it when the elastic band did the job. I'm not quite sure. I'm merely speculating there, but nevertheless, this is quite unusual because I haven't seen this on any other figure in this line. But overall, I think this is quite effective and looks good, and yeah, I'm quite happy with this. Now, I do think the costume is very nicely made. As I noted at the top of the video there, his costume's maybe a little bit too light a shade of green. It's more of a lime than a dark green, but that's a very minor nitpick. I still really like the colour of the gone for here. It's very colourful. I really like how it contrasts nicely with the yellow, and this is a very attractive looking colour scheme and design. I think this works really well. Now you might notice that the yellow sparks that he's got in his costume are essentially transfers that have been stuck on, except for I suppose around his pants area, which is sort of an extra piece that is quite flimsy. You can move this around. It's not really solid, and it's a very thin sort of faux leather material. So yeah, I've got mixed feelings about this. It looks a little bit amateurish, but it's only one part of the costume. Overall, I still think this looks pretty good. They've also gone to the trouble of modifying the gloves that that you'll know by now. I'm not a huge fan of these big chunky rubber gloves, which hinder a bit of the articulation and look a little bit clumsy and a little bit too big on these figures. But nevertheless, it is nice to see they've modified them with that plastic piece there to show that there's sort of the electricity bolt coming off the gloves, which I think is very cool. I really like this extra touch. I think it's very nicely done. They've also decided to continue with this theme and giving him the rubber boots as well. Now, these work slightly better because they're not the thigh-high boots, or the calf-high boots, I should say. These are obviously just shoes this time, and these work a lot better, especially when the trouser leg and the cuff just slip over them. It looks a lot more in proportion, and I think overall this negates some of the clumsiness of the chunky boot that we see in some of the other figures in the line. So overall, Electro kind of looks in proportion. It works a lot better here. Now, for the most part, all of these figures use the same base bodies and all have the exact same articulation scheme. So if you've seen any of the other videos, you'll know exactly what to expect now, and I'll just run through the ones here. So Electro has a swivel at their neck there, so he can spin his head right the way around, but there's no wobble, there's no looking up or down really. He does have this fantastic ball joint in the shoulders. I love this on these figures because the arm can go right the way up, it can go right the way back and arc out, and it's fantastic. It has a huge range of motion. This is supported by a single jointed elbow, so he can bend his arm to about 90 degrees, and he also has a pin swivel at the wrist. Now sadly, because of the big rubber gloves, he can't really get the most out of this articulation, but it is there nevertheless if you took the gloves off. He's also got a fantastic rotating ball joint in the waist, so he can move from side to side, arc forwards and backwards, and lean from side to side as well, which is great stuff. And then he's got the hinged hips that allow the legs to kick out all the way to the side there, kick forwards and backwards, and they're supported by the single jointed knee, bending the leg to about 90 degrees. And again, there's another pin swivel in the ankle, and this time, because the boot is a lot shorter, we can actually get some use out of this. So the foot can still move from side to side and of course arc, hinge in and out as well. So I have to say, even though Electro is an interesting choice for this lineup, considering that we never got, say, a Venom figure, for example, or even a Mysterio, which would have been fantastic, I do think that this Electro is a very, very nice addition to the line. He's very bright and colourful, and he's got a certain charm with his mask and some of those features there that I think, it makes him a well worth adding to your collection if you get the chance. Now then, next up we have Carnage, and conversely to Electro, this is one I'm really, really pleased did make it into the collection. This is definitely a character I really, really wanted, particularly as a kid growing up in the 90s. Carnage was a huge deal, and he's absolutely fantastic, so I'm really pleased to have him here. The packaging, as we've come to expect, is gorgeous. I think they've done a really, really nice job with this. That image of Carnage there is spot on, and I think the overall colour and presentation of this looks amazing, as always. So another fantastic cover art. And speaking of cover art, the famous cover they've gone for is issue 361 of The Amazing Spider-Man. This is, of course, Carnage's first appearance, aptly called Carnage Part 1. And yeah, this is a really very famous cover. I remember getting this when I was a kid and being really impressed with this cover, and obviously introduces this major villain, and it's fantastic. So I think, yeah, this definitely warrants its status as the famous cover to go along with this character. I think it's really very nicely done. Fantastic Mark Bagley image there, and yeah, absolutely agree with this choice. And on the reverse of the packaging, of course, we have one of those individual images of Carnage there. It's an action pose, and this looks really good. Definitely caught the feral, deadly nature of this character, which I think is fantastic. And when we open up the flap on the front cover, we can see two of those images there with a little bit of bio about the character and the issue where he first appears, which is really cool. And of course, on the right hand side, we have the figure through that window display, which looks very impressive. And the figure continues to impress once you've got him out of the packaging. His costume is really vibrant and bright. It's a really striking red on this costume, and it really pops and looks really impressive. The head sculpt and the paint apps are wonderful here. I think they've done a really nice job of this mould. We can see the individual teeth. We can see that obviously there's a gap there. We can see the back of Carnage's throat, so we get that lighter pink. We see the spots on the eyes, and of course all the veins running through this sculpt. And it's just the paint apps are just really very, very carefully applied. It looks really solid, and this has definitely caught that feral, monstrous quality that we have with Carnage. So I think this is a fantastic sculpt. If I was going to be critical, I might say that the head feels a little bit too small in proportion to the rest of the body, because the body is quite a bulky thing, and of course they do recycle this body with pretty much most of the figures in this line, so it's not always appropriate, and I think, yeah, it's a very minor thing, but the head just looks fractionally too small, I think. But as I said, the costume itself is fantastic. I really love how vibrant and bright this red is. It works so well. It's really eye-catching. And then of course we have the transfers of the sort of the black veins running all over the costume, which looks great. And then as an added bonus, they've added some plastic pieces to represent the tendrils, so it gives it an extra texture, makes this feel a little bit more 3D, and it works really well in my opinion. Also, I'm really pleased to say that they've opted not to give him big silly gloves or silly boots. They've obviously put him in the one body stocking suit, which is great, and they've let his hands, just simply painted his hands there. So they are moulded in that red plastic, so it's relatively seamless with the rest of the costume. And then of course they've painted on the black veins, so it is consistent, and I think this looks really good. And of course this rings true for the entire figure, right down to the feet of the character. And I must say, he has no problem standing freely on his own either, which is fantastic. This fabric is very accommodating and allows for multiple different poses, and works very well. Overall, I have to say, I think this figure is a real winner in this line. A much appreciated entry. As I said, it's a real shame that we didn't get the Venom to go alongside him. That would have been very cool. But as it is, I'm still really glad that we got Carnage, and I think they've done a tremendous job on him. Okay, I'm moving on now to the Green Goblin. I have to say, this is probably one of my favourite figures in this entire line. I think they've done an amazing job on him. But with that said, there's definitely a caveat that they took a few chances. It was kind of experimental, this release, because they did some unique things with this figure that they didn't do with any of the others in the line. Some of those things pay off and work really well, whilst others not so much. So I have kind of mixed feelings about this figure. Overall, I really love it. I think it's a fantastic addition, but there's definitely a couple of things that, yeah, might raise a couple of eyebrows. But let's start with the packaging. I hope you agree that this is amazing. I really love this. This is so bright and colourful. It really captures the spirit and the fun of comic books, I think. So I really love this image we have of the Green Goblin, looking really manic and crazy there. I love particularly the lighting effect that we've got, so he seems like he's uplit. I think this is really nicely done. Definitely captures the spirit of this character, no doubt. I also really like in the top right hand corner, left corner I should say, the pumpkin bombs that are sort of being held in. This to me looks like, it definitely puts me in mind of John Romita Jr.'s artwork. I could be wrong, I don't know whether they have used that, but nevertheless, that's what it puts me in mind of. I really like this. I think it has character all of its own, and I think it's very nicely done. Now, there have been dozens of amazing covers featuring the Green Goblin. It seems like every time you put the Green Goblin on a cover, it becomes instantly iconic and famous. But even so, amongst all of these classics, there are of course a handful that just immediately spring to mind when you think of this character. And I think the one they've gone for here, issue number 39 of The Amazing Spider-Man, is definitely one of those. Very famous. Obviously, it's the famous unmasking of Peter Parker, which, you know, is a real contender. There's a couple of others, of course. There's the Night of the Goblins, another really famous one I might have gone for. But this, yeah, definitely captures the character perfectly, and of course, definitely deserves and warrants its reputation as the famous cover for this character. Meanwhile, sadly, on the reverse of the packaging, we just have this image that we've seen before, which is obviously just promoting the mail-away exclusive Aunt May figure. So there is sadly no Green Goblin artwork here to be had. And yeah, as I say, I'm not a huge fan of this. I wish they just put it as an advert inside the packaging on a leaflet or something like that. It's a shame to take up the whole of the back of the packaging, but there we go. And then, of course, when we open up that front flap, we can see a couple of lovely images of the Green Goblin, a little bit of bio about that issue of Spider-Man, and of course the character. And then on the right hand side we have that window display showing off the Green Goblin in all his glory. So this is, again, as always, very, very attractive. I think it's really displayable and just a lovely presentation. Okay, and once he's out of the packaging, I think the first thing that is going to strike you about this figure is just how incredibly vibrant and bright these colours are. It's almost neon. That green is so incredibly vibrant, which I think is absolutely fantastic. That is a definite plus. He's so colourful and so fun. I think the head sculpt, although it's been probably exaggerated a little bit, I think it's really hit the nail on the head. I think they've done a very good job of this. It's caught the sort of manic craziness and slightly scary expression on his face there. Definitely rings true to the character. I think the paint apps are very nicely done. Again, a very vibrant green paint they've used on the main part of the face, but then we've got little details like obviously the black running through the eyes. The eyeliner really enhances those eyes, and of course we can see the gums and the teeth. All of this I think is fantastic. Now his head actually has obviously the big purple, I'm not sure what you call that really, but it's hat, I suppose. This is really nicely molded. It's a real nice shape. It's got lots of like crinkles and rumples in it, so it looks very natural and, like I said, very authentic to what we see on the comic book page, which is brilliant. I have a slight criticism though, is that it seems to be an added piece that's been added into the head, so we can see that there is a line. And at first I wasn't sure if this was articulated so that it could be moved around, so you can have it in various positions. It doesn't seem to want to give when I touch it. I'm not going to force it, so I think it's just that seam there where they've added it on as a separate piece. I think that's disappointing. That's a shame, because obviously it is kind of distracting to see that big line there, but it's a minor gripe. I really love the tailoring on this costume particularly. I think they've done a very nice job of it. Of course, they've got that sort of fish scale mail effect by weaving that directly into the costume, which I think looks really good. And as I said, very vibrant, super vivid green, which is brilliant. But I also really like how they've tailored the tunic, so it's nice and tight. It looks perfectly in proportion, and it's a very nice shade of purple that perfectly complements the vibrant green that we see on display, which is fantastic. He's also got a couple of extra pieces. He's got that plastic belt around his waist there, and he also has his little pouch, which is articulated. It can move, and it's fairly flexible in that you can move it around various parts of his body if you so wish. I think this looks really good. I think they've done a very nice job of it. Interestingly, about the pouch, you can actually open it. There's nothing inside, so I wouldn't recommend it, but it's there nevertheless. I think they've done a very nice job of this. Sadly, not everything is perfect though. We'll notice once again we have these big rubber gloves. As if that wasn't bad enough, sadly, these are also discoloured. Certainly on mine. I don't know if this is the case on all models, where maybe I was just unlucky, but yeah, these are obviously a very different colour, almost translucent in places, and yeah, it's very distracting, sadly, and it detracts from what is overall a fantastic figure. Also, I will notice on mine has been in the box pretty much from day one. I've not actually played with this. I didn't get this as a child. I got it as an adult collector. So he's been kept very safe. But I do note that his gloves are very sticky. There's definitely, I don't know whether they've been coated in a special substance or whether this is something that's happened over time. But something to point out, there's a real sticky quality to them. I'm not quite sure why. But on the other hand, and quite literally in this case, we have a pumpkin bomb. This is firmly attached, it's stuck to this right hand, so it can't be removed, or well, it can be removed, but it won't go back. It's not plugged in. It is stuck in with glue, so I wouldn't recommend removing this. But this is a cool little extra feature. I really love that it comes with this accessory. Definitely completes the Green Goblin, and it also distracts a little bit from the oversized clunky gloves that we have as well. Again, this is nicely molded, nicely painted, and I think they've done a really good job of this. So I'm really pleased to have this. I think this is a nice little touch that really just finishes this figure off. Now, he does also have the chunky, clunky rubber boots, which I'm usually deriding this line for. However, in this instance, this is a unique mould. This is the only time I think that we see these boots on any figure in the line. So it's nice that he's got that unique quality, but also I think it works a lot better here because these are slightly taller. They've got all these rumples in them. I think it justifies them being slightly chunky, and it works a lot better. He seems more in proportion overall. So I have to say, I think these are a real winner. And then the other final surprise is that he actually comes with his glider. Now, this is a fairly lightweight piece of plastic. It is all one mold, and although it is nicely sculpted, there's no other paint apps running through it, which would have been nice if they'd done that. It would have enhanced some of the grooves and bits and pieces they've got of detail on here, but they decided not to. But that doesn't matter too much because obviously the original glider in the comic books was fairly plain in design anyway, and I think this is a pretty good job. And you've probably spotted that there are two straps, so of course the Green Goblin can strap in and actually sit or ride on top of this glider, and this looks pretty cool. It actually works surprisingly well. I wasn't convinced at first, given the shape of the boots and how big they are, but actually this works surprisingly well. And as you can see, after you persevere a little bit in terms of balancing his weight, he doesn't really have too many problems standing freely on this as a base. So this works much better than I thought it could, to be honest, and I'm actually really happy with it. I think it looks pretty decent overall, and I think I have to say, this figure is definitely one of my favourites. Probably because he's so bright. I really love that head sculpt, and I love that he comes with these extras like the glider and the pumpkin bomb. And I think it's a real shame that we didn't get a hobgoblin. They could have just repurposed this a little bit, give him a cape, give him a slightly different head sculpt and a hood, and you pretty much would have had your hobgoblin there. So I'm really sad that we didn't get that variant, really. That would have been fantastic. I would have loved to have had both of these in the collection. But as it is, and if it's going to be only one of them, then I am glad that I've got the Green Goblin. He's obviously my favourite of the two, and I think they've done a really fantastic job of him. And then finally we turn our attention to probably the strangest release in this entire line, and that was the Mail Away exclusive Aunt May figure. Of all the characters in all of the Marvel Universe, this seems like a really odd choice to make as an exclusive mail away incentive. I can think of probably 100 other characters I would have preferred to have had in this line, but I can understand some of the thinking behind it, because obviously Aunt May obviously holds a very special place in Spider-Man's heart, and I suppose in a lot of fans' hearts as well. So let's start off by looking at the packaging. Of course, it does have the standard Famous Covers line branding. They've replicated the Spider-Man's web in the top left-hand corner, which makes perfect sense. And then we have an image of Aunt May there, which is nicely presented. Still, to me, it still seems a little bit surreal. But that's probably just my own personal bias. It seems like an odd choice. But as I said, there's probably very good reasons for it. Now, in terms of the Famous cover, they've opted for Amazing Spider-Man 115. This makes perfect sense. I think Aunt May has only graced a handful of Spider-Man covers across the years. Most of them seem to feature Doc Ock in some way. But I think this is a really dramatic cover. I think this works really well. And of course, we have that action image of Aunt May with the gun there, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I think this is a well-deserved choice for this figure. Now, sadly, on the reverse of the packaging, there is nothing really, apart from those spider logos that we see all over the packaging. There's nothing on here, so there's not even an image of Aunt May to go on the back. So this is pretty dull. And I think that kind of carries through to when you open the interior flap as well. We have a couple of images of Aunt May here that are not the most dynamic or exciting images in the world. There's a little bit of information about that issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And of course, on the right-hand side, we have Aunt May on display in the window packaging there. So, yeah. All in all, for me, this is a fairly dull presentation of what is usually a very exciting and interesting line. Now, I'm going to be honest with you from the get-go here. I'm not a big fan of this figure. Everything about it seems to work against it to quite a horrific degree in certain circumstances. Now, my first and probably biggest gripe is the head sculpt. I think this is quite monstrously done, I have to say. There's something quite creepy and disturbing about this portrait. I've got to be honest. It fills me with a little bit of dread every time I see it. There's something very zombie-esque about this version of Aunt May. She looks very hungry, and I think she could, lunge for you, to be honest. That's kind of the impression I have when looking at this sculpt. Clearly, this isn't helped by the fact that some of the paint is definitely coming away around the face, and yeah, oh man, it looks bad. I've just got to say, it just looks bad. In fairness to them, they have done a decent job of the hair because they have used real doll's hair, but it's kept nice and tight, and they've even given her a little bit of a bun there. So yeah, I think this works well. Now, I'm normally a fan of bright colours, but I have to say these colours just look really garish. I'm not quite sure why they chose them. It's nice that they give her an apron. I like that they gives it a little bow on the back of the figure there. It gives it a bit more visual interest, I suppose. But as I said, it just looks really garish and a bit nightmarish, this colour combination. It just doesn't look great. In terms of detail, I do like that they've given her tights and even these little slippers. I think this is a nice touch. I think it's well done. Again, not the most exciting thing in the world, and it just seems kind of funny whenever I look at it. But nevertheless, I do think this is a nice touch. So overall, I can't help but feel bad because I've really not got many nice things to say about this figure. I find it very disturbing and quite freaky to look at generally. I think it's an odd choice to begin with, and the overall design, it just doesn't seem to work. Nothing seems to really come together. Instead, what we seem to have is this nightmarish version of Aunt May, which is pretty horrific all in all. So there you have it. There is my overview of Spidey's Rogues Gallery from the Marvel Covers series line from ToyBiz. I have to say, what we've got here is pretty good. I really love the Green Goblin, and as I said, I think the Carnage really stand up, and even Electro is a perfectly good addition to this line. I think it's a shame we didn't get more characters from Spidey's Rogue Gallery. It seems insane that we didn't really, given that we could have had maybe a Hobgoblin, a Mysterio. We probably could have even repurposed one of the bigger molds from, say, Sabretooth figure and had a Rhino in there, a Shocker. Oh, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, it's such a shame that we didn't get more. But what we do have is very, very nice. And I think, if the line had continued, we would have got some really pretty full, fantastic roster of figures here. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.